dawn of a unified continent. With the passing of Jus, the dark clouds that had long shrouded Hyaenia were lifted, giving way to the warm embrace of hope and freedom. The people, weary from years of tyranny, rejoiced as they glimpsed the dawn of peace and prosperity. With Jus' death, a heavy burden was lifted from their shoulders, and they dared to dream of a brighter future for themselves and their children. Celebrations erupted across the land as the long-oppressed populace finally allowed themselves to believe in the promise of a better tomorrow. As the news of Jus' death spread like wildfire, the neighboring country of Leopardia, which had long been held captive by the same oppressive forces, faced an ultimatum from guerrillas: lay down its arms and surrender. Under immense pressure from the people and the growing resistance movements within its borders, Leopardia had no choice but to surrender unconditionally. In the aftermath of their capitulation, Leopardia and Hyaenia merged into guerrillas. From that moment on, the names of Leopardia and Hyaenia were never heard again, as they became part of a greater whole, a unified nation that stood as a testament to the strength and resilience of its people. Meanwhile, the nations of Birais, Leoniais, Tagera, and Wolfia, inspired by guerrillas' triumph over tyranny, seized the opportunity to gain their independence. Each of these newly sovereign states looked to guerrillas as their motherland, viewing it as the source of their liberation. Their people worshipped Kodo as a god, not only for his religious influence, but also for helping them break free from the shackles of Ruda's oppressive rule. Kodo, who had led the resistance with quiet determination, was now revered as the architect of this new era. His leadership not only dismantled the structures of tyranny, but also laid the foundations for a unified continent where freedom, justice, and democracy could flourish. As the architect of this new world, Kodo's legacy would be remembered and honored for generations, as the people of the continent embraced the era of peace and prosperity he had helped to create. The silent hero's longing. As Kodo sat alone in his dimly lit office, the weight of his newfound power pressed down upon him like a heavy cloak. The once mighty guerrillas nation, now unified under his leadership, celebrated its victory over tyranny, but for Kodo, the joy of triumph was tinged with a deep, lingering sadness. The people hailed him as a hero, but as he gazed out the window at the flickering lights of the city below, his thoughts were far from the accolades and honors bestowed upon him. Kodo's mind drifted to the one person who had been absent from his life for far too long, Durika. Her name echoed in his thoughts, a haunting refrain that tugged at his heart with a bittersweet ache. The memories of their time together played out in his mind like scenes from a distant dream, each one filled with the warmth and tenderness that he had once known. In the quiet of the night, Kodo allowed himself to be vulnerable, to acknowledge the void that Durika's absence had left in his life. He had conquered nations, toppled tyrants, and risen to the pinnacle of power, but none of it could fill the emptiness that lingered in his heart. "Where are you now, Durika?" Kodo whispered to the empty room, his voice barely audible, as if afraid that speaking her name too loudly would shatter the fragile peace he had found in her memory. But the room offered no answers, only the hollow silence that had become his constant companion. Kodo closed his eyes, and in the darkness behind his eyelids, he saw her face as clearly as if she were standing before him. Her gentle smile, her sparkling eyes, the way her laughter had once filled his heart with a joy he hadn't known was possible, all of it came rushing back to him in a flood of emotion. But those memories were tinged with pain, for he knew that the Durika he had loved was gone, lost to the passage of time and the harsh realities of the world they had both endured. He had seen her once more, in the blood-soaked aftermath of his battle with Ruda, and the sight of her had been both a comfort and a torment. She had aged, as had he, and the years had changed them both in ways he could never have imagined. "Durika," he whispered again, but this time, the word was a prayer, a plea for the one thing that had eluded him all his life: peace. Not the peace of a nation, but the peace of a heart that had loved and lost. A soft knock on the door interrupted his reverie, and Kodo quickly composed himself, straightening in his chair as his assistant entered the room. "Your Holiness," the assistant said, his voice filled with deference. "You have an important meeting at 9 o'clock. Kodo looked up, his gaze piercing as he fixed the assistant with a steady stare. "Call me President," he said firmly, his voice carrying the weight of his authority. "Don't call me Your Holiness." The assistant nodded, taken aback by the uncharacteristic command. "Yes, Mr. President," he replied before quickly exiting the room. As the door closed behind him, Kodo sighed and leaned back in his chair, the momentary distraction fading as his thoughts returned to Durika. He knew that the road ahead would be filled with challenges, that his responsibilities as president would demand every ounce of his strength and resolve. But even as he prepared to lead his nation into a new era of peace and prosperity, he couldn't help but wonder if he would ever find peace within himself. For now, all he could do was carry on, bearing the weight of his duties with the same stoic resolve that had brought him this far. But deep down, in the quiet recesses of his heart, Kodo knew that the one thing he truly longed for, Durika, would remain just out of reach, a memory that he would carry with him until the end of his days. In the guerrillist language, Kodo meant silent hero, a name that holds true to his character and destiny. Kodo had wielded power even greater than Ruta's, guiding the guerrillist nation with a vision of peace and prosperity.